Well, I finally got around to finishing the second season of Tokyo Ghoul, which is called Tokyo Ghoul Route A. For those of you who may have not watched my review for season 1, or may have forgotten what Tokyo Ghoul is all about, here's a quick summary.
Of course, biggest gripes I have with the series would have to be the shipload of unexplained questions. Like seriously, every question has to deal with either Rize, Kaneki's circumstance, CCG's agent's history that I really wanted to know, Anteiku's member's history, Aogiri's Tree, among other things, are just never explained. I mean, there's so many questions, either with characters, the pacing, the unexplained questions, they're just never explained. I just feel like the animation studio of Harriet just decided to get the idea of adaptation from the manga to the anime, just wanted to get the viewers to make up their own theories. It should be very simplistic for the reviewer to understand what the plot is and what the questions that they're trying to give an answer to.
Well, anyways guys, welcome to my Anime Gone Wrong video of Tokyo Ghoul Route A. Honestly, this intro sums up the same exact thing I had problems with season 1, but let's dive deep into my thorough reasonings behind why I personally classify this show as an anime gone wrong. Let's finally get started, shall we? While Tokyo Ghoul is clearly Kaneki's story, Tokyo Ghoul Route A is not. It is a story about two groups, the people who he has left behind and the police who are hunting down the ghouls. The story takes place where season 1 ended, with Kaneki defeating Jason and now going to join the fight with his friends from Anteiku against the CCG and the Aogiri Tree. But later on, he joins up with the Aogiri Tree, also known as the bad ghoul group of the show. The main reason why Kaneki joins the Aogiri Tree is so he can get stronger and be able to protect his friends at Anteiku. Even more disturbingly, the whole direction of the show had changed as well, with a lot of scenes taking on a much more simpler angles, almost as though it was trying to really convey that less complex level of storytelling. It literally comes up out of nowhere, especially when you consider that just moments before Kaneki's decision, he was condemning and actively fighting against the people in that organization. Kaneki is so glaringly fails to achieve anything that it becomes the point of his story. He's a direct cause of the destruction of what he wanted to protect. His intelligence downgrades and he disappears from the spotlight, also deprives the series of its protagonist and makes it feel kind of directionless. The storyline, so to speak, is more human-centered this season. What's more surprisingly with this second season for me is that it focuses on Omon as much as it does. The CCG certainly took up a good chunk of the first season, but with him taking on a partner with Akira Moto, that pushes us more into the politics and intrigue side of how the business all works and the struggles of some of the elites. A lot of the driving narrative for the CCG is the pursuit of the owl, a truly dangerous and devastating force, but I never felt like it connected well as the primary opponent. It was more of a force of nature without a personality, though it had at least some personal moments for some of the elite CCG members who lost others to it. I love the fight sequences and the way that they unfold the power and weapons at hand, but the owl itself as a true villain was just a monster that can't really capture your attention because its motivations are just so simple. I found myself furious rather than satisfied at the end, which felt as if the so-called finale was rushed and only half the story was told, exactly like season 1. That's probably one of the biggest complaints about Tokyo Ghoul. All of the important finale details remain up in the air. What is the fate of Kaneki? Did Hide succumb to his wound? What is Aogiri's next move? The show was preparing to show us one badass, if possibly climactic fight. Only just before the fight got underway, it cut away from the fight to a different scene, and by the time they cut back to the fight, we don't know what happened. All we see is the doves or the CCG members who was involved in the fight with their weapons out, and then the episode ends. Just like that. Roll the credits, no conclusion for you. Hope you enjoy your blue balls. Sure, there is an after credits scene, but that was essentially just a tease for what may or may not be a third season of the anime. But at the end of the day, it has to be rewritten and include all those smaller details that we missed. When watching Tokyo Ghoul Route A, it felt as if the season assumes that you're well aware of the story of Tokyo Ghoul and that nothing will come to as a surprise. The entire season felt stagnated with very little action and story progression taking place. It was extremely frustrating to not be presented with reasonings behind the actions taken, and there being no real point to story climaxes. Tokyo Ghoul Route A has a lot of open plot threads, or at least more than enough that it becomes a significant problem for me. The show had a bad tendency of introducing new characters or plot elements and summarily failing to tie them up in some fashion. There is very little conclusion to anything that occurs on screen. It proclaims itself to be a tragedy, but the story never really ties up loose ends for it to be satisfying. Perhaps it's a victim of circumstance, but I feel that Tokyo Ghoul should have simply used the second season to tie up the loose ends created by season 1 rather than creating more issues. The problems continue for Route when it comes to its characters. Besides being completely distant to the audience, their independent development is severely lacking. It's also difficult to pick any character to initially focus on, not just because they are all incredibly weak, but because none of them are given enough spotlight to constitute a main status. Like where season 1 placed an emphasis on Kaneki, season 2 appears to attach itself from Kaneki's personal story. Kaneki more or less literally becomes a support character in what is seemingly supposed to be his story. If he's supposed to be our lead character, he's quite possibly set the record for the least screen time a main character has had in his anime. For the majority of the episodes in Route A, he only appears long enough to barely qualify as a glorified cameo. On top of that, the majority of his limited screen time is spent with him being silent. He gets very little lines, and this includes internal monologues, so his character really doesn't grow all that much. Hell, thanks to his lack of speaking, we don't even really get a chance to grasp on many of his motivations for his actions in this season. After his previous trauma at the hands of Jason, Kaneki was no longer that scared, helpless kid, but instead a new character that was a confident, strong ghoul. But following his beginning speeches and departure, his vocabulary is reduced to a lot of screaming and occasionally here and there. He has some kind of metamorphosis that essentially enwraps his mind, but like most everything within Route A, why this happens to him isn't clearly looked at. He manages to go around attacking random human buildings and groups until finally realizing he should have been there to protect Anteiku personally instead of indirectly. His character is supposedly killed, the end is absurdly convoluted, and since his actions have been relatively unknown, his growth is nearly non-existent. Next is Toka. Where do I begin with her? I like Toka in the first season, but here, she's somewhat almost more useless than Sakura from Naruto because she doesn't do a damn thing. After fighting to save Kaneki and then him suddenly leaving her in the coffee shop, Toka is somewhat detached. In order to take her mind off the situation, Toka completely reconstructs her life to mirror Kaneki's before his departure. She studies to get into his college and takes care of the orphan girl Hinami like he used to. She even befriends Kaneki's best friend. Her inner turmoil about fitting in the struggles she faces against her brother and society are replaced with quasi-romance feelings, effectively killing any development she may have had, which would have been at least tolerable had they done something with such a turn of events. Instead, after working rather hard to be with him and the 2 times she comes face to face with him, what occurs is her attacking him and letting him go. The scenes can make sense in context. She is simply letting out her frustration against the boy who won't look her way, but this goes against what Tokyo Ghoul had for her as a character. By the end, the only thing that she gained was a few facts from a college textbook, and honestly, the anime never truly explores the motivation behind her actions. All we see is the once self-assured young woman who has suddenly transformed into a little hinsy, angsty teenager in distress, wondering why her prince has abandoned her, but who is unwilling to do anything about it. She again just spends the vast majority of her time doing one of 3 things: moping, studying to get into college, or running around. And I mean the last one quite literally, as Toka spends large chunks of her appearances just running to places, often trying to see Kaneki, sure, but is still in the end just running around to places. The rest of the cast from both the human side and the ghoul side are not even worth mentioning. Nearly all of the dubs or the CCG members are given one-note personalities, with their respective persons being more foreign than the ghouls that inhabit the show. Amon does nothing but fight and complain, Akira laments about her dead relative, and Takezawa has some forced melodrama. Other members exist, but a passing show of their messed up face or a single line from the enemy about their power doesn't tell the enemy anything about their character, let alone what kind of experiences they might have had. And the same can be said for the ghouls. All the Aogiri members is filled with characters that somehow seem to have passed with their dove counterparts, but such revelations are never given, and subsequently their characters mean nothing. Names like Noro, Tatahara, and Ito are just that, names without a fraction of a message behind them besides that they are really cool looking. The only character that maybe earns some sort of credibility is Junzo. He is a psychopathic teen who finds joy in the slaughter of ghouls, where here in this season he is now working under Shinohara at the CCG, with his background being explained in the exchange between the two. As he was raised by ghouls as a pet, participating in various blood sports, he is unable to connect with the human world in a normal way, except with Shinohara. And after all the time he spent with his pursued father, he shows some form of compassion and sadness for the only person who cared for him. Unfortunately, even Junzo's markings are not enough to keep the cast stitched together. Animation is another thing that needs to be added. This is an area where Tokyo Ghoul Route A falls flat. The art style for Tokyo Ghoul isn't that engaging. Many dark grays, browns, and greens are used all over the place, making the anime feel more depressing than beautiful. Granted, this may be what the show was going for, but it only makes everything seem muddy. Also, the surrealistic spaces that are presented in season 1 seem to have vanished in Route A. The loss of the surreal atmosphere in Tokyo Ghoul was quite disappointing to me. It was a strong connection to the characters that has been lost. Even more, the fight choreography and direction is lackluster, where the duels seem to be like an amalgamation of blobs maybe striking at one another here and there. The character designs for Route A can be good at times, but are nothing too impressive. The owl is quite intimidating, Kuma's ape mask and many of the other ghouls are definitely unique and what does give the necessary feeling of dominance, yet actual animation pulls it all back down, being below average in most cases. The early episodes are the most irritating, with a loss of flow and movement, static characters, and simple facial expressions. The later episodes at times can go against these notions, but having the fight through the censoring, the use of these irritating camera cutaways, and the obstructing debris makes it hard to see the movements even when it's supposedly going on. For example, episode 4 was by far the most excruciating episode to get through visually. First of all, the use of CGI on the car wheels is absolutely terrible, and it makes Black Bullet's CGI look good. The budget cuts are abysmal here, and dear God, the so-called fights in this episode are a joke, because the frames for the episode is so damn jarring that they often skip or delete frames in the animation because Studio Pierrot must have ran out of a budget for that episode. It was clearly made on a smaller budget and the art seemed to lack detail and fluidity that season 1 had. It's very obvious during the fight scenes, which seem clunky and jarring rather than fierce and intense. In general, it's hard to not pick up the inconsistencies throughout season 2, and it's even harder to not be disappointed by it. But all I can say is, that keyboard though. The OP is extremely grating on the ears. The instruments are a mishmash of sound that doesn't seem to follow any kind of order. The singing is all over the place and it isn't catchy at all. Granted, that isn't necessarily a criteria to judge. It's as mangled as the rest of what Route A gives. The only good thing about the OST is really the ED. The drums and singing in the first half work nicely in tandem, rising and falling in power as it works its way up to the halfway point. At that moment, the background singers kick in and the piano takes on a much more prevalent role, giving the whole piece a presence that really overtakes the whole anime. On top of all that, the various ending art for each of them is quite beautiful too, more so than anything that the actual art for Route A used. The rest of the soundtrack often uses loud sounds and more pounding instruments for a higher feeling of creepiness and awe, but it can also tone down that feeling, incorporating a soft piano for those more heartfelt moments. The tracks fit the mood of the anime but aren't really worth listening to outside the anime itself. More like in the first season, the audio in both the English and Japanese dub were okay at best, nothing to complain about but nothing to really praise either. Because of this, I could easily recommend the English over the Japanese. They're both pretty similar in quality, overall moderately average at best. Yes. Now we get to go down into the nitty-gritty details of what I personally do not like about Tokyo Ghoul Route A. Granted, your opinions or concerns may differ from mine, but let me tell you my top 5 biggest complaints I have about this show. Number 1. Kaneki's absence. Kaneki is visibly absent for most of the series, only making brief appearances during the confrontations between the Aogiri Tree and the government, while his character has regressed to an almost mute persona that no longer gives the same insight nor questions the way things are with the world like he did previously. The viewer could make the assumption that due to his traumatic experience in the first series, his personality has changed to compensate for his defeat there, indicating acceptance of the way the world is and the message he has now taken taken to integrate into his new society. Except there seems to be no indication that this is the case, since Kaneki barely vocalizes any of his thoughts now, leaving his actions to be questioned by his colleagues who make assumptions based on seeing him integrate into a group he previously had no need to have ties with. Number 2. Too many characters. There are far too many new characters, some of which just appear for a bit, like the one-eyed ghoul twins, and were never spoken of again, by the way. Sure, they seem quite intriguing, and in a longer series, introducing them at that point may have made sense, but why were they crammed in this arc at all? They surely had something to do with the whole "can humans be turned into ghoul" thing that several characters ponder over, but since we've known from the first damn episode that they can, this isn't a mystery for the viewer. It is a mystery for some of the characters, given that it's a mystery that doesn't get resolved in this season anyways. It makes even less sense on why the hell they even put it here. Number 3. Unanswered questions. The show adopts a completely nonsensical and disjointed front that, upon closer inspection, follows no semblance of thought. Kaneki's underlining problems. Sorry, they aren't looked at in depth. Where were the girls who only had one eye like Kaneki? What became of Kishimura, aka Baby Owl? What was Aogiri's true motivation? Why did Toka literally do nothing for 12 episodes? There's no answers to these questions because the show doesn't bother to talk about any of them. It's not like as if they bring them up themselves to elaborate on, they sort of lazily occur, with the narrative progressing from one instance to the next without contributing even an ounce of credible evidence as to why anything that is happening is going down. Number 4. Unanswered questions about ghouls. I couldn't give a about the CCG characters and their struggles against the ghouls. Why can't we uncover the secrets surrounding the ghouls already? Where did the ghouls come from? What determines their powers? Do the Kajins have special properties? And how can a normal person wield them? What can a half-breed do better than anyone else? How did Rize die? For sakes, we have these mysterious humanoid creatures that exist in this anime, and I still don't understand anything about them. And finally, number 5, the final episode. The final episode killed Tokyo Ghoul Rude in a big way. It's not terrible, and there are some parts done very well, don't get me wrong, but the finale is perhaps the best evidence that once again the show feels incomplete. Meaningful, dramatic gestures such as Kaneki carrying Hide's body are drawn out to the point that spoils the gesture in the first place. Critical minutes that can be used for dialogue or character interaction were spent on shots of Toka running or Anteiku burning, and again, it's not as if those shots aren't important, but they're just overly used, almost as if the directors had a few good ideas for the final episode and forgot how to throw all their eggs into one basket. Where at first you feel the emotional pain that the series is trying to convey, it makes you want to throw up your hands because the narrative is just poorly handled and you never really come close to feeling any sort of closure. Tokyo Ghoul Rude is a mess of an anime, but I believe there's a simple reason for this. Rude is an anime that assumes you have already read the original Tokyo Ghoul manga. Everything that you hated from the first season is back, and it's somehow gotten worse. Lack of character development hurts the series a lot, since there is a large amount of backstory. Seriously, what's the point of having all this backstory when they're only confined to flashback scenes? Rude's overall direction is honestly shaky at best. Most of the time it's downright confusing. Letting Kaneki have almost no screen time was a very poor decision, since all that development he got from the original series just disappears into thin air, almost like he now becomes this mysterious side character. Instead we get to have a look at different perspectives from different characters. Interesting idea in theory, and if pulled off right, it could have been a major plot device. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work in Route A. Like I said, there isn't a clear direction in this series. Kaneki is still undoubtedly the main character, but it sure as hell didn't feel like it. I didn't get invested in any of the other characters either. Sure, their backstory was great, but we only saw those scenes for a few minutes at most. Tokyo Ghoul Route A didn't just fail at being an anime, it failed at being anything worthwhile. In general, the story is abysmal, as it suffers from horrible pacing problems. There's a strong inconsistency in the animation department. The completely wrong cast of characters get the majority of the screen time, whilst the main characters from the original series get relegated to supporting roles, and the show, honestly, just becomes forgettable. Well, you guys, this does wrap up my anime gone wrong of Tokyo Ghoul Route A. As you could tell, this was probably one of the most frustrating scripts I've had to read, because there just was so much hate and frustration built up in this script as far as what I wrote and what I could think of what to say about this anime. In general, this is just my opinion toward it. Obviously, people may differ, so all I can say is if you guys did like this video or dislike this video, either way, please comment down below on your thoughts and opinions of the show. I love to know what you all think of the show in general, even though it's been a few years since it's been out. Regardless, my name is JcGreen, and I'll see you guys next time on my next anime related video. Peace out, guys.
Human moment.